So, Niels, I was introducing you to everyone so that we know each other, me, Christian, and you, for a long time because of the International Audiences Network. Niels was here with us during the Internacionalismo FMJ 2030 that happened at Museu da Manhã last Friday, which was really, really great. And today we are having the opportunity to receiving him here, and so we can exchange ideas and talk about the main topic he's going to introduce us. Professor Niels is a social scientist but has been working with urbanism and the Embassies Network for too long. So we are really happy to have you here on your birthday. So I have the moment to say congratulations.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Kate, who is behind there. And now it's up to you. So feel free. I won't give you the microphone because we're being recorded for the YouTube. You can speak freely, and then we are going to open for questions and answers.
Yeah.
Okay, people?
Good. Thank you very much for the introduction, and not least for inviting me to come here. It's really a great, great, great pleasure. I'm going to talk about gesturing atmospheres and artistic research. And I'm going to begin with a small video of our grandson, Daniel, when he was 2 years old. Then he, in a conversation with the neighbor's daughter, Maj-Britt, showed us what gesturing can be in speech without words, but with a lot of tone in the language, and bodily gesturing too. They had this conversation. Now the picture should. It should be shown also because.
Gesturing, yeah.
Yeah, here we go. The mother saying, "What language are you speaking?" Yeah. So that's it. Now he don't think that is funny anymore. So let's stop here. What he was doing, there were no Danish, only one Danish word, yeah, yes. He said, yeah. But then they were speaking only with the tones of the language and with the movements of the body. That is, for me, that is gestural communication. It clearly was a communication process. They communicated with each other. They didn't say something explicitly, but they said a lot through the tone of the language and the bodily movements. Then it's suddenly going to one side and then to the other. So that was the little help I will have had in this lecture by our grandson, which is now 24 years old and studying journalism. I'll have other helpers in what I'm going to say. One will be the philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein. Another one will be the anthropologist, philosopher, sociologist, theologist, which I also talked about the last in the Museum of Tomorrow, Brunner Natur, a little bit Brunner Natur, and the German philosopher Gernot Böhme, as he would, who has written a lot of on philosophical stuff, on phenomenological stuff, on the concept of atmosphere. So now perhaps I need a little help to get into my PowerPoint. Yeah, and then just that was yeah. Thank you, and then I'll go back. Well, this about atmosphere. One day in Paris, I came across this cafe, who precisely has the name of atmosphere. My questions today is that the point of departure is that we can only determine the character of an atmosphere if we expose ourselves to it in situ, in the place where it happens, in place and time. And then the problem is, which I'm going to talk about, the problem is, how do you transport your atmospheric experience in time and place to other people in other times and places? How can this be done in such a way that the atmosphere somehow is transported also as atmosphere? My answer to this question is that, yeah, what one could say, well, can description of atmospheres, as I say here, themselves be atmospheric in such a way that the experience you get from the transported atmosphere is somehow similar to the original atmospheric experience? Can you feel the in situ atmosphere so that you can feel the in situ atmospheres in ex situ context? And my question then is, or rather my question then is, can gesture, the concept of gesture, help elucidate this problem? And as you may understand already now, I think it can. And what could the problem of artistic, what could the role of artistic research be in this context? My helpers, as I mentioned, is Wittgenstein, Latour, and Gernot Böhme, and Daniel, as you saw. And here we have, voila. Atmosphere, well, I'm not going to, in this place, I'm not going to talk very much about atmosphere. I think ambiance, atmosphere, everything, you know more than I do about that. So I'll just take this small definition from Gernot Böhme, saying that atmospheres are sensuous experience in which we feel the simultaneous presence of what is sensed and ourselves sensing it. Think of how you feel when you hear the buzz of a mosquito. Mosquitoes should be quite well known in this city. So this simultaneousness of something out there and your feeling in here, out there and in here doesn't really work. I mean, these are inadequate concepts because the atmospheric experience says that these are simultaneous. You don't have, on the one hand, the outside, on the other hand, the inside. You have this in between of atmospheric experience. Gesture, as we have seen, have exist in many ways, but at least they exist as bodily gestures of movements of the body with a meaning. You can eat your dinner or your lunch in such a way that people passing by will understand that you don't, the way of eating, your way of gesturing your eating can be, it can include a message saying, please don't disturb me. I don't have to say it, but I can communicate the meaning with the way I'm it's not, as Wittgenstein would say, it's not the function of eating. That's not the point. The point is the way of eating it, the way you are, your bodily way of positioning yourself, which is the point. And going back to the small video, Ludwig Wittgenstein has a very fine saying that verbal language contains a strong musical element, a sigh, the modulation of a tone for a question, for an announcement, for longing, all the countless gestures in the vocal cadences, as he said in the remarks on the philosophy of psychology. And I mean, this what Wittgenstein is saying here is what Maj-Britt and Daniel were showing us, even quite atmospherically in this video. So, and one could say about language and music, well, there's musical gestures in language, but there are also linguistic gestures in music. You can have a piece of music structured in such a way that you know, here we have a question, and after that, somehow in the music there comes an answer. Gesture in music is the expression of the tone of the tones, and the timing, not the metronomic time, duck, 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 but the moving feeling of time. That's Wittgenstein would say that too, but then he has a point, yes, but you may use the metronomic time for artistic reasons in the music, so that duck, 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 as could be a point. But the main thing is that it's a question of timing, the time of toning the tones that you have in music. So you have gesture both in language and in music. And one then could say that gestural communication, as we have seen in the video, is, I would say it's gestural in a double sense. It's communication through sensuous formation of meaning. You wouldn't call it gesture if you couldn't link the concept of meaning to it. But it's also a way of suggesting, of leading. In Latin, you have the word gerere, as we would say it in Danish, gesturing towards do this and don't do that. Go in order to understand or feel the meaning of something, move in this direction. I'm gesturing to go in this direction rather than in this direction. I'm not saying precisely how, but go in this direction. It's a way of leading, directing, or suggesting the other, to pointing her in a certain direction rather than other, as I just said. Well, voila. And one then could say, well, we are in a certain culture. We could talk about something like a semiosphere of gestures. A lot of gestural family resemblances, as Wittgenstein would call it, not they are linked to each other, but they are not of the same kind. They are only like families that resemble each other. But in such a semiosphere, there will be gestural family resemblances between different realms of meaning, different kinds of media, acoustic, visual, tactiles. Such resemblances allow answering a gesture in music with a gesture in language, with a dance step or pointing towards a painting, if there's just, or saying, well, what I am hearing now, or your gesture for me is similar to this painting of Picasso, as we all know, for instance. There's a similarity. And such gesturing languages are all grounded somehow in a common culture or in a common life form. There will be a lot of gesturing in the Brazilian or Portuguese language and Brazilian ways of moving bodily, which I may not understand. The only thing I can get from it is there must be a meaning with it, perhaps. But another meaning that perhaps the same gesturing would have in a Danish context. Now, this is from a little piece I wrote many years ago to an anthology on a 10 years anniversary for Copenhagen Jazz Club in Copenhagen. I wrote this little piece. I'll read it for you. Several years ago, I was listening to a jazz quintet in a jazz club in Aarhus. The saxophonist played a sax solo, and the trombone player stood a little aside, listening intently to the band. Sitting in front of the quintet, I too was listening intently. Suddenly, the trombone player and I did the same thing. Following the dynamics of the solo, the tensions of rhythm, and the structure of the chorus, we clapped hands loudly at precisely the same time and place in the flow of the music, and with precisely the same forward drive. An infinitesimal moment later, after hearing the sound of the two pairs of hands clapping just one clap from two different places, we looked at each other, surprised, nodded in a slightly surprised way, and smiled. We didn't say a word. We hadn't planned anything, but I dare say we both felt happy. What had happened? We had been engaged in gestural communication between the two of us and with the soloist and the band. A lot of gestural meaning and communication in such a process. Now, before we go to the question of gesturing atmospheres, I would say, well, yes, but you also can, you don't have to gesture atmospheres in order to transport them to other places, other persons, places, and times. I found here an article from 2011, which is about measuring ambience, a tool for quantifying the ambience that you perceive. And what did they do? Yeah, well, they were looking at atmospheres of light in interior spaces in Eindhoven. 30 people were given several words beforehand. They could take them, such as adjectives as detached, terrifying, intimate, cool, mysterious, romantic, cheerful. Go into these spaces and decide which of these words were the most appropriate to characterize the atmosphere. It was, and they got a questionnaire, and this questionnaire then were used in different spaces by 30 persons. And this questionnaire, these questionnaires were then gathered together and put into statistical analysis. And the characters were allocated to the different spaces. And it turned out that the concept of comfort was characteristic for the atmosphere in a boutique on sport. Liveliness, they said, in a boutique of interior decoration, perhaps not that surprising. Tension as an atmosphere in a casino, and detachment as the atmosphere in a bank. Well, anyway, that was a result. So I mean, and you can read this article, and it's all formulated in a neutral and in many ways it's a neutral and non-gestural article. Although I would say there is gesture hiding in these adjectives that were put into, that were given to the people who did the investigation. But anyway, you don't have to. Atmosphere can be communicated in other ways than gesturing. But now let's look at gesturing atmospheres. I would say that atmospheric affects, they are obviously entities for linguistic gesturing. Sensuousness and meaning merge in the affective expression that can resemble the in situ situation of the atmosphere. For instance, this example I have taken from Gernot Böhme. He says that you may say about a garden atmosphere that it's gently melancholic. Böhme would say then, yeah, the words themselves somehow conjure up the atmosphere of the garden, gently melancholic. There's something gently melancholic about saying gently melancholic. The expression itself is somehow gently melancholic. And precisely such gesturing words can give us the feeling that the words contain the atmosphere. Wilhelm Flusser, who was a philosopher, discussed rhetoric also. He says that gesture can decontextualize the atmosphere. It can preserve it in gestural form and make it transportable to other times and places. That's precisely the idea of, I think this example of gently melancholic really shows how finding the right expression can, and you can take it. I could go to a park in Rio and say and tell my friends in Aarhus that it was gently melancholic, and they somehow would understand the feeling that I'm talking about. And to bring a little Bruno Latour into it, he talks about, in this context of presence making, saying gently melancholic is a way of making this atmosphere from this place in Rio present once again in another time and place. And he's using quite another example, but he's using the example of saying, I love you to the one I love. You can say that in two ways. You can say it in a gesturing way, where it's clear that there is the trembling of the voice tells the other that this is an important saying and meaning. I love you. It can be said gesturally every day, every morning, every evening, every night. And it's still a presensing of the feeling. And it's quite another thing than information. The other could say, well, I have heard that many years ago. I know it. You told me. You told me 1,000 times. I know it. You told me last week. You told me a year ago. I know it. Why do you tell it to me? Continue this. This is that is the sentence understood as information. The sentence understood as gesturing is this presensing the feeling. Again, it's, one could say, such presence making is precisely experiencing the meaning and directing the attention towards the feeling of love. Now, this, a lot of people have taken such a picture like this. I have too, in Venice. But in a certain sense, one could say that this is also a presensing of a visual presensing of the atmosphere in Venice at that time and place where my wife and I was there. So the reason a lot of people would take such photos, for me, precisely is that this is a way of gesturing your atmospheric feeling to taking it with your mobile phone and taking it to another time, another place, another persons, in order to show what it was that somehow impressed my feelings at that time. And of course, gesturing, just as gestures can be in many media, so gesture concerning atmospheres can point towards pieces of music, towards paintings, towards dance steps, towards postures of the body. One could say about this piece of architecture, this piece of architecture resembles this way of dancing, or this way of painting. It would be a gestural communication of the atmosphere too. And you can have similarities between different atmospheres. Here again, I got an example from Gernot Böhme, when he says that you can find a similar cheerful atmosphere in a poem, in a building, or in a painting. And precisely this that you can have such similarity is grounded in the semiosphere of gestures that you are taking part in. So I would say, and this is the close conclusion of this part, gesturing atmospheres atmospherically can be sensuously understood in X-city times and places. It can happen. But remember, gestural transport of atmospheres is not a keeping of constants. It's inherently unstable. It's possible, but you have no guarantees. There's no guarantee in gestural communication. Gestures may be misunderstood precisely because they are gestures and not information. Still, even if it's misunderstood, you will have a gestural communication process. As I said about Daniel and the girl, they were communicating gesturally without words. We may be communicating gesturally and perhaps misunderstanding each other, but communication is something broader than misunderstanding. A continuous misunderstanding will still of gestures, but also of ordinary descriptive. A continuous misunderstanding will still be communication if you are precisely continuing your discussion with each other. So that was the first part. Now let's see a little to what artistic research is about in this context. And here I'll begin in a place that perhaps may surprise you concerning artistic research, namely with a letter Friedrich Engels wrote to Karl Marx in 1865, I think it was, asking Karl Marx, why don't you publish Das Kapital? We are waiting for it. Get it out. What are you waiting for? Karl Marx answered, it was in 1865. Karl Marx said the following, translated into English: whatever shortcomings they may have, the advantage of my writing is that they are an artistic whole. Ein artistisches Ganzes, as he says in German, which can only be achieved with my way of never letting them be printed before they lay completely in front of me. Well, Karl Marx didn't succeed. He never published this whole, he never got this whole artistic scientific artwork published. He got a lot of manuscripts, and all those manuscripts, they are now being published, and people are diving into it, finding out that, well, perhaps Karl Marx didn't really mean what became the law of the falling rate of profit. If you look into the manuscript, he's much more in doubt than the whole Marxist tradition thought about it. And then he says another thing. When then the first volume of Capital was published, he said something like this: the method of presentation, in German, Darstellungsweise, must differ in form from that of the inquiry, the Forschungsweise. The latter has to appropriate the material in detail, to analyze it in its different forms of development, to trace out their inner connection. But only after this work is done can the actual movement, die wirkliche Bewegung, be adequately presented, be adequately dargestellt. If this is done successfully, If the life of the subject matter is ideally mirrored via gespiegelt, then it may appear as if we had before us an a priori construction. Now, this could be an artist talking about all that research, all that artistic research that comes before finally putting it together into an artwork which may look as an a priori construction where you cannot follow the research process. The implication of this is that science, now I'm really interpreting Karl Marx perhaps more than he would like to hear, but anyway, science, according to these expressions, science, according to Marx, needs the artistic idea of a well-composed whole in order to present the results of research in such a way that the real connections of the subject matter are mirrored, depicted in a lively and mobile way. The artistic presentation, the Darstellung of the research, is part of what makes the knowledge production scientific. So, art and science, matter of and form, content and composition shall, if we take really take serious what Marx is saying here, should cohere. Like the artistic undertaking of various pre-investigations for the artistic work, which disappear into the work itself, so the presented research may look like precisely an a priori construction. There's no sharp distinction between artistic form and scientific substance. If the composition succeeds. If it doesn't succeed, then the scientific substance may be accessible for the readers, but the whole dialectical construction of this artwork of 3 volumes of Das Kapital, which never succeeded for Karl Marx, would not be there. I mean, this kind of this unity of artistic form and scientific substance necessitates, if you will have this unity, it necessitates a composition that somehow, through some criteria, are successful or is successful. Now, this is very, very, very different from a lot of other understandings of the relationship between art and science and research. Often it's said that these are two sharply differentiated areas. Art is about sensuous knowledge. Art is about the je ne sais quoi, the indistinct, obscure, which of course exists, but precisely as indistinct and obscure, and therefore something artists and art should take care of. It's also said that art is about singular entities, it's about uniqueness. And if art is about repetition, then it's the actualization of singular potentialities. While, on the other hand, science and research is about what is clear and distinct, which is comparable, where you can generalize, where you can test hypotheses, and where you can reproduce the testing again and again and again. And theory is about primarily about the causal explanation. I mean, this is a kind of understanding of relationship between art and research you can find in a lot of context. For instance, in the Danish parliament, there was a discussion about this. And one sociologist, Henrik Dahl, who has turned into a liberalist politician, he said about autoethnography as art and non-science. You mean autoethnography, where you are, to talk with Marx, where you are darstelling, you are exposing your personal feelings and experiences from your own life. Well, Henrik Dahl here says that, well, yes, especially successful representation of personal memories and feelings can be called lyric or art or similar, but we can never, ever call them science. And when they were discussing what we are using the money for in Danish research, he would say, the money you are giving to artistic research, better give it to the Danish military. But on the other hand, Henrik Dahl then says, being scientific includes what the other members of the community of researchers can test and criticize, what has been presented on the basis of matter-of-factness and transparency. No one can really test what a researcher feels or has experienced sometime in the past. This cannot live up to the ideal of reproducibility, reliability, validity, and credibility. The standard separation of, once again, the standard separation of art and science. Now, from the German sociologist Niklas Luhmann, I have learned a little trick, which is that when you have such sharp distinction, try to let the distinctions re-enter the distinction. So that if you have a sharp distinction between art and science, then let the distinction between art and science re-enter, for instance, the art side. So you, within art, have a distinction between art and science, between artistic art, one could say, and artistic research. And on the other hand, if you can let the distinction re-enter the science part, then you will have, on the one hand, what one could call scientific science, on the other hand, artistic research. And this, in fact, is what is happening. I mean, in Sweden and Norway and England, you can have a PhD in artistic research. You can be educated as an artistic researcher in some universities. And if you look at the one could say the landscape of artistic research in Europe, you'll see something like this. There's a very important person in this discussion is a Dutch researcher called Henk Borgdorf. He distinguishes in this way. Well, if you move the distinction between artistic research, between art and research into the artistic side, then you get artistic research with an emphasis on artistic. If you move it into the scientific side, you get artistic research with an emphasis of research. And in those schools who are stressing the artistic point in research, they would say that artistic research should be as close to artistic practice as possible, but still should be different. There would be a perspective of sui generis, which emphasizes artistic values in the becoming, presentation, and evaluation of the research. The presentation, the Darstellung, here may be an exhibition. In German, Ausstellung. And you can see that in in some journals of artistic research, and the Nordic Journal of Artistic Research too, that what we in ordinary scientific journals would call articles, they are in these journals, which are mostly also electronic, so you can do a lot of experimenting, they are called exhibitions. So you can be exhibiting your artistic research work in the Journal of Artistic Research. And one would say then, here I'm quoting a friend of mine who was a former PhD student at the Aarhus School of Architecture, Marie Markmann, saying that, of course, she's in that line, of course, artistic research is practiced with a background in artistic methods. The difference, though, is that if you want your artistic work to be artistic research, you have to document the process, you have to document the values, you have to document the decisions, and you have to investigate what are, in fact, most artistic research also includes putting an artwork into the world. And then as an artistic researcher, you should be somehow find out how is it received in the world. Artistic research, on the other hand, should be as close as possible to the general criteria of research. Again, still different. It's more an academic perspective concerning research questions. You should come up with all the well-known stuff. You should come with a research. I mean, a research question, references, methods, communication, dispersion strategies, but it still has to be internally connected to artistic practice. I mean, in the artistic research field, you would throw yourself into it. Don't use your time to formulate research questions, because if you make your research questions too restrictive, you can be sure that you will not be surprised by something happening in the research process. While on the other hand, this in some universities, well, research has these criteria, and so you as an artistic researcher also should satisfy these criteria, but still move as an artist in it. And then there are some people who say, yeah, well, how about abolishing the distinction altogether? How about I mean, this is still a way of operating with the initial distinction between art and science in the background. How about forgetting it? And that's what you can find in the anthropologist Tim Ingold. Recently, he said in an interview in a French internet journal that we must move towards a richer, more poetic understanding of truth. And if that means that the objectivist protocols of scientists who insist on absolute detachment of the observer from the thing observed, if that distinction disappear, so be it. He would say that there are some forms of anthropology and some forms of art that are not standard science, but research as, both of them, research as experimental praxis that changes the researcher as well as the research in a process that is never finished. Research is research. Research is search again. And while you are searching again, you will always meet difference. You can be quite sure, even if you want to reproduce exactly the same as from a scientific point of view, there will be some differences. And seeing from this point of view, precisely the researching, the searching, again, showing small differences is the point of it. Truth in research is not a stable and final entity that can be achieved, but inexhaustible, always larger than us. Sounds a little religious. Always beyond what can be determined physically or captured conceptually. Research is beyond facts. Truth is beyond objectivity. Research, I would say, understood this way, is what Hegel would call Geist, in Danish, ånd, in English, spirit. As my late friend, professor in the history of ideas at Aarhus University, Hans-Jørgen Schanz, would have said, this is Geist. Research is experience. To live in the world in correspondence with it. Here we have a change in the meaning of the word correspondence. Correspondence here means co-responding to the world that is changing, and we are changing too. So according to Tim Ingold, the proper vocation of research is this: if truth lies beyond the facts, then science can become research only insofar as it's willing to forgo objectivity and follow the way of art and of anthropology into a correspondence that unites experience and imagination in attending to a world that also attends to us. It would be for science, too, to join in the pursuit of truth as a way of knowing in being through practices of curiosity and care. Therein, I contend, lies the proper vocation of research. So now let's link artistic research and gesturing atmosphere. Some of you will know this picture from a PhD from this institution, Mariana's PhD. Isn't it obvious? Now I'm really putting a rhetorical question. Isn't it obvious that artistic research or research in Tim Ingold's understanding has a lot of potential to gesturing atmospherically? Not least because artistic Darstellung, as Marx would say, may also be research Ausstellung in a journal of artistic research. Let's have a few examples. Alexander von Humboldt, who was very well known for his inquiries and into Central American geography in the 1800s. He found that it is impossible to understand and transport the new natural scientific knowledge about Central American geography to other people in other times and places, namely the Europeans, without artists, landscape painting mediating the total impression of the landscape, rather than only the analytical insight. That was for Humboldt an essential part. You could not have geography without artists. Presencing, one could say, in other times and places, that total impression which the analytical geography couldn't present. Or as sociologist called Andrew Abbott talks about, well, if you look into sociology, there will be, you will find examples of what he calls lyrical sociology. For instance, he takes a classical Chicago school, urban sociology school analysis of the Gold Coast and the slum, saying that it looks at a social situation, the book feels it our overpowering excitement, and it's deeply affecting human complexity. That's what he does, Sorborg, and then writes a book trying to awaken those feelings in the minds and even more the hearts of his readers. I mean, this is classical Chicago School urban sociology with an artistic element. Or Howie Becker, who's also a Chicago School sociologist, wrote about what he called performance science, where you organize the presentation of your research as a theater play, making research multivocal. Informants as well as researchers act in the play, as does different voices of the researchers. That was a way of opening up this, what Marx called this a priori construction, to much more dialogue between the involved people. Or take Bruno Latour. He wrote a book on religious speech. I remember it so clearly. In a congress I think it was in '98 or something like that, in just outside London. He was going to present a paper about religion. What he did, and no one understood what he really was doing. He made a sermon to the sociologists, showing what religious speak according to Bruno Latour is. And you can find that in the book also, on the torments of religious speak. It explicates the truth condition of religious speak by, at least to some degree, there's a lot of other discussion in the book, but to some degree showing it in the form of personal religious speak in a sermon-like way. The atmosphere of religious speak here is presented atmospherically as religious speech. Or the young Danish sociologist Nikolaj Schultz, who has worked together with Bruno Latour on the book of a new the emergence of a new ecological class. He has written a book called Land Sickness, and I quote here from an earlier paper, where he is in a way, in a literary form, showing actor network theory and the concept of earthly, not, as I told about it, not substances, but subsistence, through an autobiographic literature. Nikolaj wrote, "Beware, surviving on the boat is not about controlling nature around us, and even it's not about progressing forward in the same direction. This would equal certain death, as we would soon crash directly into a cliff or be torn apart by a wave from the side. It is rather, surviving on this boat where he is, it's in the Mediterranean, it's rather an ongoing discontinuous negotiation between a wide array of different entities, the shape of the boat, the instruments, Victor's knowledge mixed with curiosity, attentiveness, and imagination, his hands on the rudder and sail, the shifting winds, waves, the depth of the sea, that will allow us to survive together. We will survive in our boat, in the sea. It's a process where we have to negotiate with surprising elements and entities that move us, and that we will have to learn to move with if our journey is not to end in tragedy. If we acquire such diplomatic skills, Timia, the name of the boat, might make it through the storm we know is waiting in the horizon and that we already feel is starting to blow. On the other side, another harbor awaits us, another land, another earth, land ahead, yes, but this time a land we actually inhabit and not just hover above as modernists. A land that is not a dream, but that once again allows us to dream. This is actor network theory as literature. Or you can take Bruno Latour's exhibition. Again, he's making, for instance, he made an exhibition called Reset Modernity, called a thought exhibition. And he says that was in order to make his book of an inquiry into modes of existence sensually perceptible. You can read a lot, and it's a very difficult book, but you can, in an Ausstellung, in an exhibition, in a thought exhibition, get another sense of it, sensually, precisely. Or he did what he called Latour also has ventured into theater. He organized what he called a Gaia Global Circus, and there's one he's telling about that, and he's saying something about the relationship between writing a play for theater and constructing philosophical concepts. And that's precisely, I like this quote, where he said, well, I'm not an artist. However, constructing a play pushes me to sharpen philosophical concepts. And here I think I have a part of Mariana Valicente's PhD, which is precisely what she called synthesis photography of poetry slam. I would say, yes, it is. It's precisely atmospheric, and way of showing the atmosphere of this poetry slam. She's doing it in other ways also in the PhD, but here we have a moment, one could say, of artistic research in this PhD. Thank you for your attention.